Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author, and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,128th day of voluntary exile and protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype and join the conversation. But you know how contractors are, especially during the month of August. The summer is coming toward an end, and they seem to be slowing down a little bit. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. We work hard to keep good things up there that'll interest you. According to the big clock on truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/Taxmageddon Day countdown page, now we're not talking about the Mayans here, we're talking about Taxmageddon, not Mayan calendar runs out. Wait till they find the wheel that says continued on it. Anyway, your taxes will skyrocket, and your worldwide financial privacy will expire, regardless of what the Mayans say, in 146 days, 12 hours, 50 minutes, and 47 seconds. Well, Uncle Sam now collects, catalogs, and stores everything. All of your private information. They have more doodads and bits of information on you than an old-style hardware store had kinds of nuts and bolts. In March, I reported that Attorney General Eric Holder, the most racist Attorney General in modern history, in cooperation, or maybe I should say conspiracy, except I don't like that word, collaboration, I don't know, conspiracy is a pretty good word in this case, with the National Counterterrorism Center head Matthew Olson and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, significantly accelerated this move toward abolishing privacy by approving a new list of guidelines for how long the United States government agencies tasked with combating international and domestic terrorism may retain the data they collect and store. Basically, this information may be served even if it contains no connection to criminal activity whatsoever. And of course, what would be really fun is to know what their real in-house definition of domestic terrorism is. I suspect reading the Declaration of Independence and demanding one's rights under them comes very close to domestic terrorism in the minds of these people. According to the new regulations, the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, one more of those damned acronyms, can store and continually assess this information for a period of up to 5 years. Now, I wonder, is that 5 calendar years? Is that 5 celestial years? Is that 5 years like the 6 days God took to create the earth? Or what does it really mean they aren't ever giving it up? I personally believe the latter. Before the promulgation, and I love that word, they were promulgated. These are edicts. This is not done by Congress that makes the laws. This is the executive branch, again, issuing rules, promulgating rules like kings and emperors. Hear ye, hear ye. The king has announced. Yep, that's what they've done. Under these new guidelines, they have to promptly destroy this cache of material gathered on the U.S. citizens if there's nothing related to terrorism found in it. Now, again, you got the word related. You know, I love the way attorneys have take words and bend them all out of shape. Related. What's that mean? That it was a comment on terrorism? That it was a comment on somebody who was a victim of terrorism? Related is just about as open as possible. And like I said, I think they're just going to keep the information forever and ever and ever until they know how often we go to the bathroom and how much and what kind and what color, probably. Intelligence officials march on toward the police state undeterred. They insist that this new leeway, as if they needed more, the only ones who've had more leeway than the United States government claims now were the KGB and the Gestapo. But they insist they need this new leeway in the gathering and collection of information because it's necessary to make sure that the homeland, der Vaterland, is safe from terrorists in training. Well, the terrorists in training are the ones wearing the federal badges. They're the ones that taxpayer dollars are paying their salaries. They're the real terrorists in training because they're terrorizing the American people because everybody is afraid to speak out and oppose them. Telling me none of them explains how this consideration outweighs the Fourth Amendment right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. I'll talk about this more when we come back in about 5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Don't go away. I've got a lot more to say. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Boy, I got to admit, I do like Beethoven. If the Germans would just stick to writing music and not trying to organize some kind of European superstate, I'd like them a lot better. Anyway, back to our story about Uncle Sam's super duper vacuum cleaner that sucks up information about everything. Even a quick review of the guidelines that we talked about reveal that the scope of so-called relevant data is enormous. Records of where one travels, how one travels, whom one visits, and how one pays for the tickets are now all the property of the Yankee government's intelligence, certainly not intelligent, but intelligence complex. Further, the NCTC and its intelligence gathering partners, meaning every private ISP and VoIP provider and everything else, they're all the partners with the government, are permitted to access and review data sets that are identified as including non-terrorism information in order to identify and obtain terrorism information. Now, does that make sense? That means if there is a perfectly peaceful country, let's say Switzerland, use Switzerland for an example, and we want to get to Nazi Germany, let's go back in time. We get to invade Switzerland and violate their neutrality in order to get at Hitler, right? Well, that's what this just said. They can use non-terrorism information in order to get terrorism information. So they can use anything they want as long as they claim the goal is terrorism information. And as I said, their definition of domestic terrorism has got to be wide enough to drive a double tractor trailer, hauling double pups right through it. That means that Obama's regime, which has a vast and growing domestic spying network, may collect, catalog, and collate every last scrap of personal information about citizens and residents and then sort through it to determine if it's indicative of anything they don't like. This is precisely the opposite of the principle of the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures. What can be more unreasonable search than one that is absolutely determined to be named to be a fishing expedition? We're throwing out a wide net. It's sort of like the movie Casablanca. Bring in the usual suspects, remember? For those of you who are old enough to remember the movie Casablanca or have a sufficiently good taste to watch it even though it's in black and white. Anyway, that's just exactly the opposite of that. Under this new rule, the government has basically declared that all searches and seizures are reasonable unless they, in their sole capacity as unelected bureaucratic snoops, decide that it's not reasonable. Well, never let it be said that I just attack the Obama regime. John Boehner is, in my opinion, a failure as a Speaker of the House. As much as I personally dislike Newt Gingrich, he was 100 times better as Speaker of the House than John Boehner. Boehner has returned to the old, failed Republican principle of go along to get along. So even as Republicans across the country are campaigning in this year's election to promise to repeal Mr. Obama's health care program, the party leadership, headed by Speaker of the House John Boehner, appear to be ready to continue funding Obamacare and its controversial mandate that includes the violation of religious liberty because it forces coverage for contraception, sterilization, abortion-inducing drugs in health care plans from employees, even of people whose religion forbids such. With no budget passed during the current year, the House and Senate last week reached an agreement on one more continuing resolution to continue funding all government departments and programs at current levels through March of next year. Now, the agreement has been scheduled for a vote in September as current spending authority expires on September 30th. At a press conference at the Capitol last Thursday, Cybercast News Service asked House Speaker Boehner, who's a Republican from Ohio, about funding for Obamacare and the contraceptive regulation, which went into effect on Wednesday. You called Health and Human Services contraception mandate, quote, an unambiguous attack on religious freedom, the CNS reporter reminded the Speaker. The Republican House can permit or not permit funding for this attack. Are you going to give the administration the money to do it, unquote. Boehner responded, listen, I and other members of the House continue to work with organizations that are concerned with attacks on religious liberty. Yeah, right. And I don't think we need to disclose at this point what our tactics will be or how we're going to approach this, meaning we're going to sell you all down the frigging river, so you just better get ready for it. Boehner noted that millions of Americans are unhappy over the mandate and, quote, we're going to continue to work with them, unquote. Well, it's real simple. Take the mandate out of the continuing resolution and have the intestinal fortitude, the guts, to force the Senate and the Democrats and that man who squats where Washington once sat, force them to shut the government down. We'd all be better off if the government were shut down. Send the FBI home. Send the TSA home. Send them all home and America would be freer. Let people pull out their handguns and defend themselves and we'd be a hell of a lot safer than we are now. The mandate, of course, is issued by the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, which has absolutely no constitutional authority for its existence, under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and has drawn fire from the nation's Roman Catholic bishops, among others. Let's not just talk about Roman Catholics. Orthodox oppose it, and so do many other evangelical Christians. They've all called it a violation of religious liberty. Well, let's talk about violations of liberty. Obama is following, first of all, his Chicago thuggish instincts, and he's following something that Mr. Clinton did so well during his 8 years in office, in which he used the IRS and the Department of Justice to investigate all of his enemies and check on the tax status of every conservative organization. So what's Mr. Obama's regime doing now? Well, his Injustice Department is investigating whether Las Vegas Sands Corp., owned by a high-profile Republican donor, broke federal law by failing to report millions of dollars of potentially laundered money transferred to its casinos by two high-rolling Las Vegas gamblers, according to the Wall Street Journal. I thought Las Vegas was designed for high-rolling gamblers, especially people who'd come from around the world to do so. The U.S. Attorney's Office in L.A. is investigating deposits made in the mid-2000s. Mid-2000s! They're only getting to it now. Think about that. They're talking about something that happened, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago? We don't know. And they're only getting around to it now. Gee, they must be really efficient. And considering that casinos are very well regulated by the state of Nevada, this makes it look really political to me. They're investigating deposits made by a Mexican pharmaceutical businessman who was later indicted for drug trafficking in 2000, and a California executive with Fry's Electronics who later pleaded guilty to taking illegal kickbacks. Wow, illegal kickbacks, as opposed to the legal kickbacks that the big banks get when they get bailed out, as opposed to the legal kickbacks a GM got. Come on. Illegal kickbacks? This is all baloney. The Journal said there were no indications that the investigation included any actions by Adelson, Sands' chief executive and a major political donor for the Republican Party. Adelson has pledged to spend as much as $100 million to help Republican candidates in this election cycle. That's a big chunk of money, and the Democrats and the Obama administration want to stop it. Federal investigators have begun focusing on casinos amid concerns that the industry's so-called lax financial systems could be used for money laundering and other illegal activities, according to the DOJ. No, they're just focusing on it because that's one more place from which they can steal money. You can't get blood out of a rock, but you can sure as hell get money out of a casino. Sands Corp did not immediately return calls from the Associated Press on Sunday. A company spokesman told the Journal that the company believes it has acted properly and not committed any wrongdoing. There was also a Chinese businessman involved who lost $125 million at the Las Vegas casino. So what? They love it. That's what Las Vegas exists for. This is David Finzer. I'll be gone now for 6 minutes for the news and a commercial. But when we come back, we'll talk about Pelosi and Reid. This is David Finzer. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi has jumped on the hypocrisy wagon that the Democrats ride so well. She's backing up her Senate accessory in crime, Harry Reid, for claiming that Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney hasn't paid income taxes for 10 years. Now, I have no brief to support Romney. I don't like him. I don't support him. But I also have to call hypocrisy when I see it. Romney has said he pays taxes every year, and the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who reminds me every day more and more of Lyndon Johnson, is wrong. Top Republicans say Reid is telling lies. Well, Reid tells so many lies, I'd be surprised if he were ever telling the truth. Pelosi, who was campaigning in Florida, said that although the allegation is unproven, she didn't think Reid was wrong to put it out there. Reid has said it is only that the tip came from a former Romney associate. He also said he isn't sure it's true. But then he raised the claim in media interviews and on the Senate floor. So he isn't sure it's true. It came from apparently a disgruntled former Romney associate. So we have, we have hearsay doubled by hearsay, then put out in the media so you can create more hearsay, and on the floor of the Senate so you get it in the official record. Pelosi said she believes Reid when he says he got the information from a credible source. So she got it from Reid. So we've got double or triple, I lost count, hearsay. She said it's also up to Romney to release more of his income tax returns to prove that Reid is wrong. Quote, if he has said somebody told him that, some credible source, that I believe that, the California Democrat told reporters after a campaign appearance. She said that's up to Governor Romney to release his returns and disprove the rumors. First of all, I thought you were innocent until proven guilty, but of course, as Juan Torres, our Injustice co-host, always tells us, that isn't true anymore. But what's really hypocritical is the fact that their candidate for president, Mr. Obama, has all of his information, except perhaps his income tax, locked up tight. We can't see his birth certificate. We can't see his college records. There's a whole long list of the things we can't see, and this woman has the gall, the hypocrisy to say that Governor Romney is the one who is hiding things and has to disprove things. I'd like to see Mr. Obama yet prove he has a right to even run for president or pretend to serve as president. That hasn't been answered yet, but the Democrats don't want to talk about that. So what do? When you can't defend your position? You start a lie about somebody else. So far, Romney's only released his 2010 tax return. He promised to release his 2011 return after it's completed later this year. Frankly, I don't think it's necessary for politicians to have to release their returns. They are still citizens. They don't give up their rights as citizens when they run for public office. And the presumption that something's wrong if you don't release it, especially in this case, just goes counter to all of the principles of common law and the principles on which America was founded. But of course, since Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid are not familiar with those principles, I'm not surprised it happens. At the White House, Press Secretary Jay Carney wielded in a little bit. He deflected repeated questions about Reid's allegations by referring reporters to Reid's office and stressing the tradition of presidential candidates releasing multiple years of tax returns. There's also a tradition of American presidents proving that they were born in this country. But I guess Jay Carney and the White House press office don't want to talk about that. Well, we always think in the silly season now about an October surprise. And usually the October surprise is something political that the one party pulls off or releases against the other party. But this year the October surprise could be a little more serious. U.S. intelligence analysts watching for indicators of Israeli military action recently reported that there are signs that Israel plans an attack against Iran in October. The Obama regime, meanwhile, is preparing to allegedly provide logistical support for a military strike, but is pressing Israel to delay any action until the administration's policy of sanctions have had more time to work. Let me see. Sanctions have been in place since Jimmy Carter was president. Right. That was 1976. Somewhere in that period, in the 70s, and so we still need a little more time. I don't think the sanctions are working, people. What do you think? I mean, these sanctions have not worked longer than some of the biggest welfare cheats in America. But the Obama administration, like they like the welfare cheats, also like the sanctions. Now, if I were the state of Israel, I wouldn't very much rely on the logistical support. The Democratic Party has a long tradition going back to Harry Truman selling out for the Free Chinese, selling out the South Koreans, John Kennedy selling out the Cuban freedom fighters in the Bay of Pigs, of making promises to our allies and then pulling the rug out from under them at the last minute. But I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu is that stupid. U.S. opposition to any pre-election strike was discussed during a recent visit to Israel by White House National Security Advisor Thomas Donilon and later visit by Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. Panetta signaled possible U.S. military options for Iran contingency during his press conference in Tel Aviv with Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak on August 1st. Panetta said the United States and Israel are united in seeking to prevent Israel from ever having nuclear arms. But note that there was still a little bit of a slap in the face to Israel because it was done in Tel Aviv, which used to be Israel's capital, not Jerusalem, which Israel has declared to be its eternal capital. Why? Because the Muslim president of the United States of America doesn't want to recognize Israel really at all. We have been steadily applying more and more pressure against Tehran, Panetta said. He said, it's my responsibility as Secretary of Defense to provide the President with a full range of options, including military options, should diplomacy fail. Any Israeli attack is expected to be carried out with little or no warning. The Israelis are not stupid. The U.S. is worried. I suppose this could start World War III. More likely, it will start a proxy war. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. When we come back, we'll talk about the U.S. targeting Swiss bankers in Europe. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and I guess this last segment we're going to talk about the problems of my ancestral homeland, Switzerland. The Swiss banking industry is dying a slow death. Unfortunately, I've been watching the severe slowdown and closures of Swiss banks for a couple of years now due to tax evasion claims, money leaving Switzerland in increasing amounts now, a rising Swiss franc, the breakdown of secrecy, the global financial crisis, and lower profitability investment products resulting in lower revenues for the banks. It's now becoming an acknowledged fact. According to a well-written article from Bloomberg, the new banking realities for Switzerland are not that nice. Profitability and banker jobs in Swiss banks are under permanent decline. They're being forced to court third-world clients as European and American clients are simply too dangerous for them. Clients are leaving and removing assets from Switzerland in billions and may reach as high as $1 to $1.5 trillion US dollars. They're obviously going to end up in Asia, where Europe and the United States will just be told to go to hell. Now, despite all the tax information exchange treaties that may be signed in Asia, the Asians are going to do what's best for them, which is keep the money, protect the clients, and tell the European Union and the United States to drop dead. They may not do it that way. They'll do it. Well, we're looking into it. We're seriously considering it. I learned in doing some work in Japan, the Japanese never say no, for example. They say it's very difficult, which is about the same as not in this or any conceivable future lifetime. That's sort of the way it works. Anyway, foreign banks are leaving Switzerland for the first time ever, including all the American banks, such as Merrill Lynch. Swiss bank secrecy is under the most severe attack in 75 years. Liechtenstein banks are also in trouble in Switzerland, and one of them is awaiting a court prosecution from the U.S. for tax evasion, which may force them into liquidation, just like Wegelin Bank in early 2012. Top bankers such as Pictet and Julius Baer today have the same views. Better late than never. These are family-owned banks with no fear about speaking the truth or dealing with reality. They don't have shareholders or outside shareholders to deal with, so they have to look and see what's really going to happen. More and more banks will return onshore to their country origin and get out of Switzerland. What this means, bottom line, is at least 1 in 3 Swiss banks will close. Think about the loss of jobs, the loss of income to Switzerland, the damage to Switzerland's infrastructure, the damage to Switzerland's gross domestic product. It's terrible. Switzerland is having war made on it by the European Union and the United States, and it's the kind of war that's very hard against which to defend. You ought to remember that right now, of course, you don't hear too much about Switzerland because of the LIBOR scandal, on which I reported in the UK, and also the HSBC money laundering scandal, about which I've also reported, which have temporarily taken Swiss banking away from the limelight. But the IRS continues to pursue the cases, and their investigations of 11 targeted banks in Switzerland have not yet been concluded. Banks are changing in Switzerland, and they're going to have to change a lot to survive. In fact, I think banks around the world are going to have to change a lot to survive, and I really think that we have a situation where the whole banking world is going to come crashing down on everybody as people realize that money is not as money is not real, and that we're living with fiat currency around the world. And if they take Switzerland down, they may end up bringing themselves down with it. Now, the U.S. is targeting Swiss bankers who are traveling outside of Switzerland in Europe. They can't target them inside Switzerland because under the Swiss Constitution, a Swiss citizen may not be extradited without his permission. Now, he can be tried in Swiss courts if it's a crime in Switzerland, of which he's accused in the foreign country, but he cannot be extradited. Swiss bankers whose names were delivered to the United States in April as part of the crackdown on U.S. tax evaders are in for more trouble. They face the risk of detention while traveling in other European countries, not just traveling to the United States. Extradition treaties between the U.S. and countries that include France, Germany, Italy, Austria, and the United Kingdom make it possible for the U.S. to work through Interpol to take legal steps against bankers suspected of helping U.S. citizens to evade or even just avoid taxes. And it's not just bankers whose travel plans are threatened. 2 teenagers who arrived in the U.S. to visit their grandparents were interrogated by U.S. officials for 6 hours about the whereabouts and working habits of their father, a banker from Geneva, according to a report published yesterday in La Tribune de Genève newspaper. Likewise, bank employees who simply had access to U.S. client data or carried out orders involving potential tax evaders' accounts are at risk of being detained as witnesses, though they are not at risk of being punished. At least that's what they're saying now. Now, of course, once the U.S. has got them and holds them under material witness warrants, they will try to find some reason to retain them. I speak from experience, as I have told you on this show before. In the year 2000, I was federally indicted because of what one of my clients did behind my back. I voluntarily returned to the United States. I was never arrested. The guy absolutely was a crook. That I didn't know it, but they were able to show it to me, that he was a crook, that he was defrauding little old ladies of their savings with this fake mortgage scheme. So I cooperated, and he helped them put him in jail. Now, what did the United States government do to thank me for that? They told me, the prosecutor said, we can't prosecute you, you're not guilty. But the Attorney General of the United States under George W. Bush refused to allow them to drop the indictment against me on the grounds that it, quote, because he, quote, did not want to establish a precedent of withdrawing an indictment simply because someone was innocent, unquote. Now, that being said, they spent 4.5 years investigating me, reinvestigating me, and reinvestigating me to try to find some way to amend that indictment, put me in jail, prosecute me, because they don't like having to go into court. In fact, I've never found anyone else where they've had to go into court and go in front of a federal judge and ask for permission to withdraw the indictment because they made a mistake. But on July 13th, 2004, 4.5 years later, after I'd lost millions of dollars in new clients and existing clients because of the indictment, they finally withdrew the indictment. So these people who are not at risk of being punished, bull, they are at risk of being punished. You don't know what the U.S. is planning to do with the data of bank employees. As a precaution, I'm advising my clients not to leave Switzerland, said a Geneva attorney, Douglas Hornung, who represents 40 current and former bank employees. Around 10,000 employees of 11 banks are affected by the potential travel restrictions. Credit Suisse, Julius Baer, Wegelin, HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation, Schweiz, Basler Cantonal Bank, that's the Cantonal Bank of Basel, Zürcher Cantonal Bank, the Cantonal or State Bank of Zurich, and the inactive Neue Zürcher Bank, the New Zurich Bank, and the Liechtensteinische Landesbank, that's the Liechtenstein Bank, and 3 Swiss-based Israeli banks, Leumi, which is a great, strong Swiss bank, Hapoalim, and Mizrahi are all on the list. Now, the United States is basically interfering, creating a real present threat for the freedom of travel to 10,000 people because they might know something about someone that the United States can't find any other proof of, and so they are using Gestapo-like tactics to get what they want. Well, now we've reached the top of the hour, and I'll be back in about 6 minutes, and where we'll talk, and I'll have a surprise for you. Instead of our usual Technology Tuesday, I'm going to have a couple of special guest co-hosts with me for the second hour, so it ought to be fun. So please join me. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Stay tuned. I'll be back in 6 minutes. This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia on my 5,128th day of voluntary exile in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, and like I said, it's August, and you know how contractors are in August, it's more fun having a beer by the pool than it is getting things done, so we're still waiting. You'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or Skype and join the conversation. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $15,949,446, almost $447 million. Over $50,000 debt per citizen and almost $140,000 of debt per taxpayer. So figure out there's a lot of people who aren't paying taxes. Who's getting stuck? The middle class. The gross domestic product lags behind the debt by, what, $600 billion, meaning the U.S. would take more than a year. If you took all of the wealth produced in the United States in a whole year, you couldn't pay off the debt. The total U.S. debt, though, is staggering. It's humongous. It's incredible. It is gargantuan. I don't know enough words about big to say frigging huge to describe it. It's $56,959,832, which amounts to a debt per family of over $684,000. Like I keep on saying, people, the United States is broke and no one wants to admit it. Today would normally be Technology Tuesday, but my technology co-host is unavailable today, so I thought, in keeping with my alliterative daily names, I would bring in the titans of talk, Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show, as my co-hosts, because the three of us always have fun talking about the news and fun making fun of people. Hello, Scott. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
Hello there.
How are you doing in Alabama?
Quite well.
Yeah, the Titans of Talk Radio are all well. It's hot, and you're right, it's August. Contractors take a while, but hey, we're here to have fun today. We've got some good stuff to talk about.
And I think I just heard David say a moment ago that he's going to keep with the illiterate. Is that correct?
No, no,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure.
I said alliteration. Yes,
That's one of those big words.
yeah, yeah. I'll send you a poem sometime, Tim. It starts out. I only remember the first two lines, but it's the most famous piece of alliteration in history. It starts out, an Austrian army awfully arrayed boldly by battery besieged Belgrade, and it goes through the alphabet. Each line, every word in the line begins with the next letter of the alphabet, all the way through to Z or Z if you prefer, and then A again. That's pretty neat.
Well, I love how you started that. You know, you started like every homeless man I ever remember. I only remember the first two lines.
Thank you very much, Tim.
That's normally how it starts for them in life. We can only hope we make it past the first two lines.
You want to have a poetry reciting contest sometime, Tim?
I would pop the popcorn for that. I definitely would.
Well,
have a cold beer in hand. I would love to see that.
Well, maybe from Freaky Friday, this week we're doing music. Well, one of these weeks we'll do movies, and maybe we'll do poetry. Anyway, let's get on to the news a little bit. Everybody talks about Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama, but there is a third man running for President of the United States who's going to be on the ballot in all 50 states, and his name is Gary Johnson. And I think he needs some reporting and then some talking. So I'm going to do some reporting, and then we'll do some talking. Thursday, he was talking to Politico, and he had a wide-ranging discussion with them and said that he thought his key for winning what he admits is a long-shot bid for president is getting into the presidential debates this fall. He said what he needs to do is meet the 15% national polling threshold set by the Commission on Presidential Debates in order for his campaign to get the message out through the debates. He said, at the debates, anything can happen, and that's for sure. Debates, I've seen debates turn elections around completely. If you go in, and of course the establishment candidates have everything to lose, and the anti-establishment candidate has everything to gain. He said he could crash or burn, or it could bring attention to what it is I'm saying, my resume. I think a lot more people in this country describe themselves as libertarian as opposed to voting libertarian. I think my voice is representative of the fastest growing segment of American politics today, which is libertarian. Now, I know that you guys hate this, that you can't comment, but when we come back in 5 minutes, then I'll give you a shot to talk about it. This is David Finzer. For Truth and Lies Radio, we will be back with the Titans of Talk, Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton, in 5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and I'm joined today with the Titans of Talk, Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show, and we're talking about the third candidate for president, Gary Johnson, the nominee of the Libertarian Party. We had a little bit of a discussion during the commercial break, so let's just open it up. Which one of you gentlemen want to weigh in first?
Well, I think Tim should. I want to hear what Tim thinks about Gary Johnson.
Well, Scott, God, I hate being the one. I'm fixing to be put up on a cross and crucified here, but I'm sorry, but the bottom line is I'm not in favor of Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson, to me, is a loser that couldn't make it on the Republican ticket, so had to backdraft and swim backwards and find an independent candidate or independent party to put him up there. He's no different than Ralph Nader the Tater, as we call him here in the South. He's just bidding to split the vote, and all he's going to do is split the vote. He's going to take votes that should or would have gone to the Republican side, because obviously more people that are conservative are on the Republican side of the ticket, so it will split the Republican side, and we will have another Obama for another 4 years.
Which I think would be
probably
a good thing.
The rest of a lifetime.
Okay, let me ask you this, Tim. Let me put you on the spot. You don't like Gary Johnson, but you did like Ron Paul, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, if Ron Paul ran as the Libertarian candidate, would you support? Then what would you be saying the same thing about him?
It'd be very tough, and the only reason I would say that I would vote for Ron Paul in that situation is, one, because I believe in Ron Paul, but I also believe that Ron Paul has enough enough people supporting him direct that it could make an impact. I believe that Gary Johnson couldn't pull enough votes to even stay in the Republican Party to even begin the run of the states. And
that's because he was also opposing Ron Paul.
That's pretty sad.
Scott, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, if I can jump in here. Tim, I have to say with my good colleague Tim, I have to disagree on several issues, but I think he makes some very good points. I don't so much, and I'm asking you, Tim, I don't so much think it's Gary Johnson, the person, that you disagree with so much, and his ideals that he stands for so much, as you don't want to see Obama get reelected by having someone that people might believe in split the ticket and the votes go to Obama. Is that what you're ultimately saying?
Yeah, that's absolutely what I'm saying, because at this point right now, Gary Johnson has no headway. He has no one hardly knows the name Gary Johnson, for one. And what it will do, if Gary Johnson adds in as the third candidate, which he already has, and if he makes it to the ballots, what's going to end up happening is what they're just going to split the Republican Party.
Right.
And I hate to say that, but that's what's going to happen. And then we're going to get 4 years of Obama again and their Democratic policies. And then we're probably going to get a lifetime of him, because he will probably announce himself king and say, Emperor. Hey, if I can get Emperor. Yes, I'm sorry. Excuse me. We don't want to copy the Brits, so we go with emperors. We want to copy all the the Muslim nations out there. But the bottom line that I see about this is that Gary Johnson will make no wave come November, and he will split anybody that was up on the border, that was up on the teetering side toward going Romney, just because it's the lesser of two candidates, will jump on Johnson just to say, well, at least I gave it my best shot.
You know, Tim, with all due respect, you know what that means?
Here it comes.
Yeah, exactly. Here it comes. I think you have fallen into the trap that the conservatives fall into all the time, that somehow the Republican Party is on our side. I can tell you from my years of experience, the Republican Party is only on our side when we force them to be. And I believe that what they did during the primary and caucus season was unconscionable, and to keep Ron Paul from even being nominated, and I believe that they should be punished. And
real quick, I want to add this in while you're on this topic here, David. My prior point. Do you disagree or agree with it? Will it split the Republican Party?
Yes, and I want to see Obama, of the two choices, and I prefer Obama to Romney. I'll tell you why. Because the economy is going to turn to feces in the next 4 years.
And the thing is I have to live and make a living during those 4 years.
Right, and it's going to turn to feces regardless of who's president. So what do you want? You want the Republican Party to get blamed, which is the only party we have a chance of getting a libertarian conservative nominated, or do you want the Democrats to get blamed so they're screwed? Remember, this is just like Jimmy Carter did such a terrible job that Ronald Reagan got elected, and all of the people like myself...
But it only took 4 years for Jimmy Carter.
It took 16 years, Tim, from 1964 when Barry Goldwater went down to an ignominious defeat to 1980 with millions of people like myself who threw their votes away, who voted against the damn Republicans because they kept on setting us crappy candidates that forced the Republican Party to the right. I want to return to the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. The only way we're going to get that is to punish them, not to reward them for lying, cheating, and stealing the nomination from Ron Paul. Because I think when you look at all the facts, Romney is as much of a thief about stealing candidates as Obama is a liar about being born in this country, or your country.
May I jump in for a moment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, with all due respect for both of your blood pressures, may I please have the floor for just a moment? Yeah, look, the thing is, I hate the way and the direction the United States is going right now under the Obama administration. I do. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see 4 more years of Obama. However, if Mitt Romney is elected, things are probably going to crash and burn. We're headed to a horrible economic time through an awful, awful financial situation. And what would happen? Mitt Romney would probably get blamed, and it would set up the perfect presidential candidacy for Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2016. That's probably what would happen. Gary Johnson at hand. The reason why he's having to run as an independent or a libertarian, the reason why he is not on the Republican ticket is no one gave him a fair shake early on. There were so many candidates out there, and the Republicans wanted to see so much of an establishment candidate, they were afraid of someone like Gary Johnson and also Dr. Ron Paul. And that's why he's having to run, and he will end up splitting some votes, I'm sure. But that's my predictions of what would happen.
Tim?
I think he's mad.
Are you still with us, Tim?
No, I just have to take my headphones off when Scott talks because he's so much louder than all the rest of us. But because he wants to get his point across. But the bottom line is I agree with you, Scott. The only problem that I've always had with any third-party candidate is you didn't make the first round. You didn't come out immediately as a third-party candidate. So here in November, we're going to have about 1 month to get to know you. And just like Jerry Johnson said, we'll have one debate to get to know him if he even makes the debate counter.
And that's a problem with the media in this country, because I remember and I recall a debate last fall down in Orlando. I don't remember what the debate, the main topic at hand was that night, but I remember one candidate and one candidate only from that debate, and that was former Governor Gary Johnson standing on stage saying, speaking of the administration, saying that his next-door neighbors, 2 dogs, have created more shovel-ready jobs than the current administration. I remember that. And, yeah, it gave him a little limelight the next morning, and then he faded off into obscurity, only because of the media did not focus on all of the candidates. They don't do it. They pick their favorites, and they determine who the winner will be.
Well, because the mainstream media is owned by big business. I mean, who owns NBC? What, GE Corporation, right?
Yep.
Okay. I mean, they're all part of they're all tied into the Washington bureaucracy. They win whether Romney wins or Obama wins. I think they win more if Obama wins. But the point is, America is heading for a crash, and I want to see it placed on the blame placed on the party that is more responsible. I mean, both parties are responsible. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not a Republican. I've never been a Republican. I've always been a conservative or a conservative libertarian. I've moved to a little more to the libertarian in my later years. Some people that move more conservative. I guess I've moved more libertarian. But both parties are at fault, but the Democrats are worse. The Republican Party has a chance of being redeemed, but the only way to do that is to force them to the right, and the only way to force them to the right is to withhold your votes. Now, you know what's going to happen, Tim? The people who back Ron Paul, they will vote for Gary Johnson, or they'll stay home, they'll sit on their hands, and they won't vote. I predict they will not go out and vote for Mitt Romney because the people who back Ron Paul don't see a difference, just like I don't see a difference. You got 10 seconds, Tim.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, the overall is, I just hate splitting the party. Every time there's been a third-party candidate, it has split the Republican Party.
George
and
Washington
it's always
hated
been
parties.
in tumultuous times where it doesn't split the Democratic or the liberal side of the party. It always splits our side.
Well, no, they've had their splits too. Anyway. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio with Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton. We will be back in a few minutes where we will continue probably talking about this and then going on to talk a little bit about the TSA. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer with Truth and Lies Radio, and today I'm joined with by the Titans of Talk, Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show, and we're talking about the third-party candidate for President of the United States, Gary Johnson, and we sort of have a disagreement going on here. Tim doesn't like him, and Scott and I sort of do. So, Tim, go ahead. You were during the break, we were talking.
Now, let me clarify real quick,
okay.
because I don't want to be misrepresented in this.
Oh, that's
it's
the fun
not that
part.
I don't like the man. I just don't like the last. You know, it's almost like he's making a run here at the end, and all it's going to do is split the Republican Party and the voters that would vote Republican. And it's not that I don't like the man. The man's got great views, and like we spoke during the break, he's probably one of the only ones that has managed to shrink government in the area that he was working in, in New Mexico. So, I mean, what he has and what he stands for are good things. The only thing about that I don't like is he's jumping in late in the game, and virtually all it's going to do, he's not going to win any minds over from the Democratic Party, which we've already discussed in prior talks, that you can't win their minds over. They're mindless lemons anyways that will follow anyone off the edge. So it's just, I believe that maybe now if Ron Paul was to have ran as an independent, I wouldn't see it as being such a negative draw.
But it would still split the vote.
I don't think it would, because
How
I believe that I think a lot of people, especially the business side that are liberal, they could have voted for Ron Paul, and there were a lot that split the vote. But I don't necessarily believe it would have pulled them all from the Republican Party like Gary's going to end up doing.
You know, I think Gary will pull people from the Democrat Party just because of his views on drugs and abortion. Now, I don't agree with his views on abortion, but it might pull people from there. And I think a lot of young people who potentially don't understand a lot of the issues anyway might just do it just on the drug issue alone. I mean, that would be crazy. But who cares if we split the Republican Party? This is the party of Abraham Lincoln. This is the party of Herbert Hoover that brought us the Great Depression. This is the party of Richard Nixon. I mean, I can think of, Teddy Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Ronald Reagan, and I start running out of Republicans that were any damn good. Now, why are we so tied to the Republican Party?
It's because of conservative values. I think people want conservative values, and they want less government. I don't think it's so much the Republican Party that people love. It's they want less government, and that seems to be the party that's most in line with that. However, that's not really true. But look, Gary Johnson, I'm glad to hear Tim say that he supports a lot of his ideals. Now, one thing I totally disagree is his stance on abortion. I think we're all three in agreement on the abortion issue. I am not for abortion by any means at all. His drug issue, I'm all for it. Legalize it. That's fine. I'm okay with that.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and put a statue in that in our studio, Scott, there will be random drug test, and you will be removed if you're on drugs. So,
and that's fine.
Even if he gets in. So, I mean, that's the case that's going to happen in a lot of companies. I could care less about his drug thing.
Yeah, I don't
drug
care about
ideas.
It. Right. Nor do I. I'm just saying I don't really care. That's not an issue that I'm taking debate with. But I think he could gain some support with that. But the thing is, he's not jumping in late. I take issue with just one thing you've said, Tim, and that's the only issue I take. You say he's jumping in late. He's been on the stage since the very beginning. He just really wasn't given a fair shake because he was not an establishment candidate, just like Dr. Paul. The same thing happened. So he's not jumping on the bandwagon late.
I guess if you say so.
As you said earlier, you said jumping on Johnson. Probably not the best choice of words, but I don't think Johnson is jumping on stage late in the game. He's been around since the beginning.
Well, before we move on to the next issue, I just want to remind you, Tim, that the lesser of two evils is still evil, and I recommend people cast their vote for the best man. You know, we always say, they always say in a fight or a race or whatever, may the best man win. I'd like to see I'd like to vote for the best man and may the best man win. And to me, that clearly is neither of the major party candidates. So if I were voting, I would take my electoral responsibilities very seriously and vote for the best man. But
yeah, I agree with that, except for one thing. I don't necessarily find myself disagreeing with Romney on all statutes. I find myself in his business manner and his fiscal manners agreeing with him. It's just some of his other choices that he makes that I'm not so keen on. So I can't say that I completely disagree with Romney and I'm a completely Romney hater. I just know that I absolutely do not agree with anything that comes out of the Obama administration or the last 4 years that I've been with. So the lesser of two evils, I'm not necessarily saying it's the lesser of two evils. I think it's just different from the one that we've had before.
Romney
and it may end up being evil. It may end up being evil. I can't go along with it.
Romney's a Mormon George Bush.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on, please. The court has ordered the TSA to explain lawless use of naked body standards. About a year ago, federal appeals courts ordered the deeply unpopular TSA to obey the law and hold public hearings on its widely loathed naked body scanners. Well, they didn't do it. This week, however, the court demanded that the Department of Homeland Security explain itself by the end of the month. A coalition of TSA critics, including the Electronic Privacy Information Center, originally sought to have the new scanners removed from the airports on constitutional grounds, violating the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. Of course, we know the government has never read that amendment. As expected, the judge stopped short of ordering the agency to stop using the scanners, but has required them now to hold 90-day public comment hearings. And to do that promptly, the rulemaking, he says, the only way to determine air travel security regime is worth its huge cost, and he's given them till the end of August to comply. I think it's just, I think if they're afraid of a public hearing because it's going to go 99.5% against them. Go ahead. Somebody there?
Yeah. Look, I have no problem with getting naked in an airport. I don't see why people get so upset about it. I mean, isn't it natural to want to go travel, get on a plane, and get naked for some stranger that you've never met before and let them grope you? Hey, what's the big deal? Come on.
Okay, Scott, very good. Well, we'll be back in a bit to continue talking about this and getting naked at airports. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio with Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton. Don't go away. We'll be back in a few minutes for some more talk. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio, and on Tuesday I'm joined with the Titans of Talk, Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show, and we've been busy trashing the TSA. The Washington, D.C. Appeals Court has tried a couple of times, or the people have tried a couple of times to get the TSA to explain itself and comply with last year's ruling that they hold a 90-day public comment period required by law, and they've ignored them. But finally, on August 1st, a three-judge panel ordered Homeland Security to do it. And so we were talking about it because this is an agency that I think almost everyone hates. The body scanners have proved to be dangerous, ineffective. They have violated the Constitution when they held Senator Rand Paul basically under arrest, because when you cannot go, when you're not free to go, according to our legal expert, you are under arrest. And the Constitution says you cannot arrest a member of Congress on their way to or from sessions of Congress, but the TSA did. So, you guys have to travel in the United States. What do you think?
I despise the TSA personally. I hate the TSA. As we were going into break last segment, I said that who minds getting nude at an airport? I feel completely comfortable doing that and getting groped by a stranger. But that was sort of said tongue-in-cheek, maybe tongue-in-butt-cheek, which was recently groped by a TSA member. I hate the TSA. I think it's a useless agency. I think this could be private companies that handle our security in airports, and they could do it more efficiently, and it would save a lot of money. I think the TSA is a nightmare to deal with.
Well, I was in Britain not too long ago in London, and they are very thorough, but they're very polite. And I screwed up, and I left my Swiss Army knife in a bag it shouldn't have been in, and they had to take it from me. And unlike the United States, I said, well, isn't there some way I can get this back? I can get it sent to me? And they have a program. They put it in a sealed bag with a serial number. They tear off part of it and give it to you. You go online, you pay, and it gets shipped to you. I mean,
wow.
It's the same security without the Nazism.
I was thinking to say, I don't think we disagree with having some sort of security that monitors us going through and getting on flights. I think that 9/11 pretty much put an end to anyone being scared about going through some sort of a security. The issue that I have with it is, in the United States, it's government run, and it's ran by typical government employees that hate their lives, that hate their jobs, I think, to a certain extent, and just overpoweringly take their frustrations out on the customers that are coming through, because in all, that's what we are when we buy a ticket for an aircraft is we are a customer on that flight. And I believe that if each flight had separate units of security, people would select what flight to go on just like they select it when they have to pay, if they're forced to pay for their baggage or not pay for their baggage as they get on their flights. And I believe that the more courteous flight, even when they go through security, will be taken care of better than the other flights.
Well,
I just have that feeling.
There's two things, Tim, that I would say. First of all, I don't worry too much about the passengers. I worry about the guy named Mohammed who's loading the luggage and how they've checked out. We know that the TSA has already hired pervert priests who've been defrocked for child molestation. So how the hell good a job are they doing vetting their people? Number two, there's a much simpler way. You allocate on every flight a number of free seats for law enforcement officers. They get special ammunition. They sit in the plane. They pack their guns. And then you do what Flight 93 did, except instead of crashing it into the ground to save the White House, you shoot the bastards and you solve the problem that way. Because the government isn't doing a good job of... What are they going to do when now another plane is something's done to a plane, it's blown up? I mean, they're going to make it worse and worse. And even in Stalin's Russia and even in Hitler's Germany, they still had a resistance. They still had things blown up, trains derailed, and everything else. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think both of you guys bring up some very good points. Personally, I want to save up and buy my own aircraft so I don't have to go through the dang TSA lines anyway. But the whole thing is ridiculous. Tim and I, on a recent trip to Europe, David, when we had a layover in Switzerland, when we landed in Zurich, we just felt at home when we walked through their security lines. They were so friendly. They were thorough, just like in the United States, but it was service with a smile, like you mentioned a moment ago. And I was like, why can't the United States adapt some type of security measure like this where you actually get a smile and a hello instead of you've ruined my day and they're pissed off at the world? It was amazing to me.
Well, one of the reasons in Switzerland, Scott, is because the people who were doing it in Switzerland were the local cantonale police. That was done locally because the Swiss Constitution requires that everything must be done at the lowest possible level under the doctrine of subsidiarity. So those were not federal officers, Swiss federal officers. Those were officials of, like if you went through Zurich, those were officials of the canton of Zurich. Those were state officials. And the state of Zurich is only 441,000 people. So they're going to be nicer because it's going to affect the people that will go through there.
Yeah, the United States could definitely look at that and learn from something like that.
Yeah, well, of course, they don't want to. I mean, that's the thing.
Oh, no.
Switzerland is a successful multicultural, multilingual country because everything's done at the lowest possible level. You could solve all of America's social problems by making them all state issues, taking them out of the federal purview, and then one state could allow same-sex marriages or bestiality or bigamy or whatever. Another state could outlaw everything.
Arkansas.
Some states could, right. I mean, it would make a big difference, but they don't want to do that. There's one more issue I want to get to before we run out of time because we've only got like 3 minutes left. The House passed a bill eliminating Senate approval of presidential appointments. By a vote of 261 to 116, the House of Representatives passed a bill effectively rewriting Article 2 of the Constitution and taking away from the Senate the power to accept or reject the appointment of many presidential nominees. Last year, the Senate passed the measure by 79 to 20, so now it goes to the desk of Mr. Obama for his signature. And then you tell me, Tim, that we've got to support the Republican Party? They control the House of Representatives, and they just sold out Article 2 of the Constitution. I'm outraged.
I look at it this way. I am one step closer to becoming President Obama's radio czar because I don't have to get approved now. That's the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh, man, more appointments, more czars being placed right into office. Give these guys jobs, and it can be done. president says it's okay. Why not? Yeah, these guys sold out completely, David.
Yeah, they violated their constitutional oath. I mean, it's just incredible. It's very clear that the role of the Senate to advise and consent is there, and they specifically removed it. And we're talking about key positions in the Departments of Agriculture, Defense, Commerce, and Homeland Security, including, listen to this one, the Treasurer of the United States, the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, the Director of the Office of Domestic Preparedness, and the Assistant Administrator of FEMA are now filled by the President with any scumbag party hack he wants, any Nazi he wants, with zero examination. He can put perverts, he can put political appointees, he can put anybody he wants, and Congress has said, that's okay, we're not responsible. I'm just in shock. I mean, where is the balance of power? Tim?
I don't know. I mean, this is a shocker to me. Obviously, I hadn't caught this story until I'm hearing it directly from you this morning, but it's bad news. I mean, that's what most people don't understand, even when they elected President Obama to begin with, was it wasn't necessarily, you know, him in there, but it's who will remain once he leaves. Court justices, appointees left and right. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to think of this. I think he's just building his, his royalty up. He's building up his group of...
But he's not doing it, Tim. This was the Republican House and a Democrat Senate. This was across the board. I mean, look at the numbers. There are more than 20 Republican senators, yet only 20 voted against. The Republicans control the House, and yet by 2-1, they voted for it. I mean, this is just incredible.
They're all sellouts.
Yep, they're
every last one of them.
Right, exactly, and it just makes me sick. And what makes me even sicker, right, is we're out of time now. Thank you, Scott and Tim, for joining me. I'll be talking to you again on Friday for sure, for Freaky Friday, when we're going to talk about music, I think, in our generation chasm. Remember, you only have 3 choices: give in and live life conserved, fight back, or